Hello and welcome to the Hoop Theory Podcast, recording this one on Tuesday, May 19th. So just last night was one of the greatest games ever played. If you're not a basketball fan, I would still suggest to go watch that game. I feel like there's something there for everybody to like, especially fans of basketball that are from like the 90s. I'm sure everybody has one of these guys in their lives. Somebody who just really likes the Jordan era or, before that even, 80s to 2000s era. Just a lot of defense, really makes fun of modern basketball for all the threes and heavy offense and not allowed to touch the offensive players or whatnot, the talking points that they give. I would go watch this game just to have a really good example of kind of the trend that's been going on the past year or so, couple years, where the direction of basketball is headed in the NBA. It's officiated much more physically. There's a lot more contact going on. There's teams are utilizing that contact more, taking advantage of refs aren't going to call everything. So they really ride the line. OKC has really been the pioneer of that specific game style, but there's been several teams that have started to adopt that, especially the Timberwolves and these San Antonio Spurs. Just one really small detail to go into really quick to really highlight that was something that I've noticed that the Spurs do. It seems like, I'm guessing, the coaching staff made this a point to try to get their players to do it, because I see so many players on the Spurs specifically do this, and I haven't really noticed this with other teams. But it seems like whenever there's a shot that goes up, when they're on the offensive end, when they crash the glass, when they kind of go up for the rebound, fight for position, they use that opportunity while everybody's, distracted watching the ball and whatnot to just shove somebody out of bounds, down on the baseline, try to make somebody fall over down at the baseline to give themselves a numbers advantage going back the other way on offense. So I think I said before that this was when they're on the offensive end. I misspoke. I meant that they would be on the defensive end. When a shot goes up, and they would shove somebody out of bounds, to start a fast break going the other way with numbers in their advantage. But yeah, so just something like that. It feels like that it happens so often that I feel like it's literally an edge that is through the coaching staff. It's a method or a game plan, a scheme that they're actually doing, not just like one-off situations. So, that's just kind of a microcosm of what I'm talking about. But I have buried the lead for sure here so far, because I have not mentioned the name of Victor Wembanyama, who just might be the best basketball player alive. We're already here. It's pretty crazy that we're already here, but I'm taking him right now over anybody else. He's going against Shea, who's, another candidate. Him and Jokic are probably the only other two guys that you could throw the hats into this ring of. But Wemby, there's nothing that he can't do. It seems like he's dominating in the paint, completely controlling the game on the defensive end, deterring everything around the basket, and then somehow in overtime, the first overtime, steps into like a 32-foot pull-up three while they have because that play that I just explained in the intro here, of one of the advantages or one of the strategies that the San Antonio Spurs use to shove that guy out of bounds to get an early fast break or an advantage in the fast break with a 5-on-4. That's what they did on this possession. Chet was shoved out of bounds by Julian Champagnie, I want to say. So going back the other way, Wemby gets the ball just across half court and just steps into this, just one of the most, I still can't believe that he took that shot. But he made it. They were down 3. There was 28 seconds left on the clock and 19 on the shot clock. So, obviously you don't need to hold it, but most people would use the whole shot clock there, I would think, to try to get a good 3. And but he just stepped into that thing and let it go with a numbers advantage. It was from the same spot that Steph, one of the greatest shots of all time, Steph Curry against the Oklahoma City Thunder about 10 years ago at this point, honestly. So it's just kind of a crazy full circle moment there. And yeah, Wemby is just at a whole different level, and I just can't believe that we're at this point. He's also, the way he's playing, it really reminds me of Jokic a lot at this point. He seems like he's borrowing things. It's just so unfair that he has just a body unlike any other basketball player ever, with the capabilities to move and have athleticism with that body and use it in a way that's nobody's ever been able to. And then he can shoot. He can he always has all this skill, but then he has a mind for the game that's just insane. That he can draw and pick up on things and add things to his game. It seems like he's replicating some things that Jokic did. I've only ever seen Jokic do a few things that I noted down from this game. This game is like a biblical text. It needs to go down in history. It needs to be preserved in the Library of Alexandria or whatever the modern day equivalent to that is. Because this game is it's an artifact. It's crazy. All the different things that happened in this one. It went to double OT. For those who somehow don't know, 122-115, the Spurs stole the game in OKC, game one of the series, in this Western Conference Finals. And it was the game that they rolled out the MVP trophy to award to SGA for his back-to-back MVP that he got this season, just announced yesterday or 2 days ago at this point. And then they gave it to him last night, in Oklahoma City in front of Victor Wembanyama, who, on top of all the other things I just listed about him, has just this competitive edge that is unteachable. I don't know where he got it from, but he definitely has it. The way that he looks at Chet Holmgren, somebody who was compared to him quite a bit growing up, and a guy that was across the lines from him doing battle in that under-19 World Cup, and it's several years ago at this point, where the U.S. beat France very narrowly in that victory, and Wemby still hasn't recovered from that loss, and those comparisons and people using that game to put Chet over Wemby, the few that did at least. The way he views that is just he wants to completely demolish Chet Holmgren whenever he gets the chance, is what it really feels like. For those who have listened to the show before, Jacob Roth, my frequent co-host that I have on in the past, he is a very, very big Chet Holmgren fan. That's one of his guys throughout the league that he just really roots for. And so he, sent a text about the game last night saying that, he noticed that Chet is petrified of Wemby and that he feels like Chet should be at least aware of Wemby, that he's a freak and everything, but not scared of him, because Chet himself is a very, very capable basketball player and one of the more capable matchups, guys to match up with Wemby because of the stature and everything. Chet is a similar build, one of the closest things we have to Wemby. And I just thought that was funny. My response that I wanted to put in here, because I, spent a little bit of time on making it eloquent and everything. I said, yeah, but it's hard to blame a guy when the most freakish athletic specimen that's ever touched a basketball looks at you the way that John Wick looks at Russian thugs who killed his dog, and every moment his sole objective is to thoroughly lay waste to your personal agency, self-esteem, and whatever competitive spirit you could possibly have left. Now, I would say that is a pretty accurate depiction of the way that Wemby handles himself and behaves when he is matched up with Chet Holmgren, which, interestingly enough, they didn't guard each other all that much, one-on-one in this game. But it seemed like whenever he had the opportunity, Wemby would try to score over Chet, which was probably the worst mode of offense that Wemby had in this game, because Chet is, outside of Wemby, Chet might be the best defensive player on the planet. But there's just levels to that. But yeah, Wemby just has this vendetta, this thing in his brain that just drives him competitively to such a degree that, the weakness, one of the biggest things with those just insane specimens throughout history, guys like Shaq and Kareem and, whoever else, there's not a lot of people you can even put in that class. But more often than not, one of the bigger negatives with those guys, one of the bigger flaws, is that they don't have that competitive spirit, that competitive drive. They are somewhat complacent. that might be one of their bigger flaws. And Wemby has just completely, it feels like he's prepared himself in a way that has completely just stacked the deck to reverse whatever, the biggest concerns are, whether it be health, injury concerns, like how he's been so ahead of that with preparation and doing yoga and being on top of, taking care of his body and everything. Like, he just seems like he's building the GOAT career from the ground up, and it was a prophecy foretold to him thousands of years ago before he was even born, and he was prepared and knew exactly what to do the moment he was born. But to get into more details from this game, he had 40 points, 41 actually, which is funny. I have not heard, I've heard so many, different videos and podcasts and things talking about this game so far, and nobody I've heard said his numbers specifically correctly. Like, nobody, I keep hearing people say he had 45 points, he had 42 points, blah, blah, blah. He had 41 points was the actual number, and then 24 rebounds. I'm not sure why there was such a common miscounting of his numbers in an infrequent or inconsistent way. But I've heard different numbers from everybody. But yeah, 41 and 24. So he becomes just the third player since Shaq in 2001 to record a 40-20 playoff game. Those three guys are Giannis Antetokounmpo in 2022, Nikola Jokic last season against the Oklahoma City Thunder, the same team, and then Wemby this year, just last night. Some of the plays that he looked like Jokic on that I wanted to detail really quick. There's one play where he had his hand held by Chet mainly, but also Shea was right there, both grabbing his, I can't remember exactly, one of his arms are being held, and he's getting a post-entry pass. It's more of a lob, though. And while he's being held down by one arm, and he opens his mouth trying to draw attention to that, but he's being passed a ball, and so he uses just his one hand that he has available to guide that ball into the hoop. Which is, somebody who watches Jokic a lot would be able to tell you that's a familiar sight. I've never seen other people do that. I thought that was one of Jokic's superpowers that only he could do, where pretty frequently people are just, trying to foul the hell out of him because that's the go-to game plan against him, which has been adopted with this Wemby game plan as well when they're going against him. But, so Jokic pretty frequently is being grabbed and pulled in different directions. And he also is trying to fight for post position more often than not because that's where he's best utilized. And so while he's doing that, a lot of times he'll have only one hand to use, and he'll just catch it and carry it all the way into the basket with that one hand. No problem, because if he's not getting the call, he still has to win the basketball game. So I saw Wemby do that in this game, which was just crazy. And then he also had another play where he was posting Caruso. This is the thing that, again, another thing that I've only ever seen Jokic do. And for some Nuggets fans, there's been a name for it that has not, I don't know if it's really caught on because not a lot of people even notice this very minute detail, but it's he has suction cup hands. The way that Jokic can catch a basketball with one hand is just something that's just mind-bending sometimes. The way the ball stops when it touches his hand is unlike anything I've ever seen. And I wouldn't say that Wemby's he has Jokic's hands now all of a sudden. That would be even more just ridiculous than it already is. But he seems to have he seemed to have adopted one of the methods in which Jokic uses to catch a ball with that one hand. And it's just very interesting. So it's when he's posting up, he has his right hand up. That's more often than not, that's how a lot of post players who are right-handed especially are calling for the ball, looking for the ball. They have that right hand up with their left hand being used to seal, put back and try to seal off the defender. And so while he's doing that, sometimes he'll have a guard pass him a ball he's not passing to the right place. The ball is not going to his right hand very cleanly at all, and instead is high to the left. The pass is off to the left side, and so he has to bring his right hand over to the other side of his head, to catch the ball. And so what he does is he puts his hand, he kind of twists it in a way to get it in front of the ball when it's on the other side of his head. And like as it's hitting his hand there, that's when he like twists it back the other way to be, in a more normal position, the way that you want to have the ball when you have it in your right hand. It's like he almost like is moving. He moves with the ball a little bit it's like a car getting onto the interstate. When there's traffic on the interstate, you want to speed up to be at a similar pace with that traffic to, fit in nicely to try to intercept the interstate in a way, have the interstate intercept you, you know what I mean, to get on cleanly. And I think that is a very similar concept to what's going on here with this suction cup motion that Jokic uses to catch the ball. And Wemby did this motion to catch a ball in a post-entry pass that was a little high off to the left. And after he caught this ball, so that this is not where the Jokic, resemblance ended on this play. After he caught the ball, he then went into a post-spin fadeaway jumper, which, lots of people do that, but it did look somewhat Jokic-esque. But then as he's fading away on this jumper, he's distracted his defender as well as the low man on the defense. And then when he gets like to the peak of this jump shot, he passes straight out of it, down to a teammate in Dylan Harper, who's lurking right under the basket. And that was a very Jokic-esque moment as well. I'm sure lots of people have seen passes like that. That's one of those ones that's not like super unique to him, I guess, but Jokic is one of the best ever at that exact play for sure. And then the other one that I noticed was that twisting one-legged floater that Wemby made to put the team up 101-99 at 11.5 seconds left in regulation. That was also it felt like I was watching Jokic like close out a game. The way that he scored that, the way that he was very patient in getting to that shot and everything, and the motion that he did to make it and everything. It was it's crazy. It's like, how can he be Giannis combined with Jokic combined with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? How can he do all of those and plus Hakeem, I guess, or Bill Russell, whoever you want to throw in there as the defensive comparison. It's just incredible. It's unfair. But, like I said, there's more than just even what I just listed. It's just like the way that he catches the ball and faces up. It feels like more now than he used to. He like has mimicked a lot of Jokic's game. And maybe he's mimicked a lot of other players' game, but just me being the very hyper-focused on Jokic person that I am, I just noticed those specific ones, a lot more than other ones. But anyways, something else about this series that I was curious going into it is the Gortat screens that worked out for Timberwolves, the Minnesota Timberwolves in the last round. I was curious to see if we would see more of that being executed by the Thunder in this round. And the answer has been not really, because other than a couple plays with Isaiah Hartenstein doing it early in the game, and something that was very surprising about this game is how quickly Mark Daigneault went away from Isaiah Hartenstein, pulled him from the game because he made an adjustment that would take him off the floor, because he doesn't want Wemby to have somebody who's just a rim protector, somebody who lurks in the paint, who doesn't space the floor, that he can just roam off of, and pay attention and just be able to be what he is, that major rim deterrent on the inside. Having a center that you can put him on that's not a shooting threat just makes his life way easier on the defensive end to lurk in the paint and do that stuff. And so Mark Daigneault pretty early on, I think it was like 8:45 in the first quarter, subbed Alex Caruso in for Isaiah Hartenstein, who Caruso had one of the best games that he's ever played. And it's just, Caruso is like, as amazing that Wemby was in this game, there's just so many other things. And unfortunately, I think I'm going to be out of time right now talking about this. I would like to talk more about it. But I just pressed for time. And it's just an insane game. You need to watch it. Caruso, all-time like role player. Dylan Harper is amazing. One of the best. Like he's just so smooth the way that he gets to his shot. He reminds me of Jamal Murray and James Harden kind of, as like just the way that he gets into the lane and scores in the post and drives, like his footwork, how smooth he is. He has this like his crossover, the way he goes in between his legs and around the back. It's so like drastic is the best word that I can think of for it. Like it does so much. It's like so significant. His crossover is so significant, if that makes sense. But also it's so clean. He's just mesmerizing to watch. This Spurs team is just unreal that they have all of this. Both these teams are unreal. They're just levitating above the entire world right now. And we're all just watching it. So that was game one. Looking forward for game two. We'll see what it brings. It's big that the Spurs were able to get this win on the road. I picked the Thunder to win this one in 7. I would definitely say the Spurs are somewhat in the driver's seat now because of that game one. But obviously, not counting the Thunder out, best team in the world right now. And we knew that this is one of the toughest matchups that they have is this specific team. They don't have a lot of good guys to do the Gortat screens and stuff like that I've talked about with Wemby. Not a lot of guys that can really move him all that well. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to the rest of the series. Feeling like the Spurs might be able to pull this one out. Now, I would tilt back their way after game one. But, yeah, like I said, still not counting the Thunder out at all. SGA, I think, will have a much better game to come in the series, probably multiple of them. And, yeah, it'll be just interesting to watch. Appreciate you guys listening. I'm going to let you go now to the rest of the episode. I've got some other things to talk about. Knicks and Cavs game has already started as I'm recording this, game one. My prediction in the video that I put out, I chose the Cavs, which I don't. That's not like my actual deep down like analysis pick. I wish I would have distinguished that a little bit better. I did kind of say something about that, but I wasn't super clear in the video that like my pick ultimately, if I was being the most like logical about it, I would say Knicks in 6. But part of me doing predictions sometimes, I'm just kind of like. Things like look like they're going this way, like logically it feels like they should go this way, but I kind of just I'm like sometimes a weird thing happens and that would lead to the Cavs just playing like a well-oiled machine and everything clicking on all cylinders and firing on all cylinders. Like what if that happens, and so I'm just kind of rooting for that, and that was why that was my pick. But yeah, my more logical and analytical pick is going to be the Knicks in 6. So yeah, enjoy watching that series as well. Appreciate you listening. I will send you to a quick break here before you get to the rest of the episode. I'll see you on the other side. Hello and welcome back to the Hoop Theory podcast. I'm going to be talking about Game 7 from last night between the Cavs and the Pistons. 125 for the Cavs, 94 for the Pistons. And by the way, I am recording this shortly before the tip-off of Thunder-Spurs Game 1. Just so you know, when I'm recording this, I'm not going to be having any knowledge of that game and what takes place. But in this one, Game 7 from last night, I loved what I saw from Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley for that matter. Mobley had 21, 12, and 6. Might have been the best game of Mobley's playoff career, to be honest. And then Mitchell ended up with 26 points, 6 rebounds, 8 assists. He was dishing it very, very early. I think he had 4 assists like within the first 2 or 3 minutes of the game. Mobley was also a plus 31. I'd like to mention that was tied for the game high, actually with Harden, who finished with not a good box score other than that one number there, the plus minus, which is kind of interesting because usually they pair Harden and Allen's minutes together, and then Mitchell and Mobley get their minutes paired together. But yeah, the plus minus didn't paint that picture like as if they shared a lot of those minutes in that way. But Allen ended up with 23 points and 7 rebounds, and then a big game off the bench from Sam Merrill. 23 points, 5 of 8 from the three-point line. And I think the highlight moment of it by far was him just getting hit-sticked by Asar Thompson on a drive. Asar Thompson was the ball handler, and Sam Merrill took a charge like straight to the chin. Really big shoulder thrown by Asar Thompson on that one. Sam Merrill had to check his mouth for blood, but he got back up and continued playing and having the best game probably of his career as well. With Mobley and him both going off for big playoff performances in their pretty short careers so far. But yeah, Sam Merrill is definitely going to be a keeper, I think, for this Cavs core. moving into this next season. I'm not sure what his contract is right now, if he's going to be a free agent in the summer or not, but actually I don't think he is. I'm pretty sure he was a free agent last summer, I want to say. I think he just got signed to a really, really good deal, actually. I think that was a early season kind of takeaway that I had right away in the season. He kind of jumped off the screen, and I was like, wow, he just got signed for how much? I'm pretty sure it was pretty low. It was, I think, less than like 11, 12 million a year, something like that. And also in this Game 7, I really like the Cavs changing up that starting lineup, even though I am a really big Dean Wade guy myself. I love his, what he brings on the defensive end, especially, but he hasn't been aggressive enough as a shooter. Like, he hasn't really demanded anybody to guard him, really. He even made a pretty good clip in this series. I think he shot like 57% from the three-point line, but he only took 11 in the 7 games. So he just wasn't getting near enough attempts up, and that was while averaging, like over 22 minutes a game. And so Strus is just a really good counterbalance there, or, just another option to go with when he's like just a crazy maniac on both ends of the floor, very aggressive with taking his shots, and also there's not really a drop off on the defensive end because of the size and energy and motor that he gives you. And also forces more turnovers and stuff like that. That's been, some pretty big moments from Max Strus in these playoffs, just, getting the ball back on inbounds plays, just catching the ball right above his head, stuff like that. So this makes the first conference finals for Mitchell that he's going to, and I think it's very deserved. I would say that I've been like a Mitchell truther, but to be honest, I've just been a truther in general. I didn't realize how much or how real the Mitchell hate actually was until this playoff run when, I had some conversations with just, some people in passing, just talking about the NBA and these playoffs. And they would mention, Donovan Mitchell being like his reputation essentially being that he's hot and cold or he's inconsistent and stuff like that. When like I've only known Donovan Mitchell to be an absolute gamer in the postseason. I don't know what everybody else has been watching his entire career. Even though he hasn't made the conference finals yet, like I've said, I don't think that many of his flameouts, at least in the postseason, was really his fault. And there's honestly a good like 3 or 4 playoff runs that come to my mind immediately where he was, the team ended up where he was the only one providing anything, essentially. I was just surprised hearing people when he was struggling earlier in this postseason. He's had some lackadaisical stretches that's been pretty unlike him compared to, the postseasons in the past several years, ever since the bubble, really. And, I was just kind of like, are we really going to act like this is, normal? This is what's always happening with Mitchell? Because that's the way people were spinning it. Like, see, look, this is what this guy is. This is what this guy does. But so it'll be interesting to see if this continues into this next round against the Knicks. Obviously, the Knicks, I think, should be favored. If you saw my bracket video, though, that I put out, I did go with the curveball and pick the Cavs, riding with my Cleveland Cavaliers. I'm not an actual Cavs fan, for those who don't know, but I just they're one of my pet teams that I picked up back when I first started this channel because I was very early on their breakout season back in Colin Sexton and Darius Garland's that pairing, and I think it was Evan Mobley's rookie year was the year that they came out of nowhere, and I was a huge Mobley guy in the draft. I had him over Cade, which I don't still have him over Cade, obviously, but I think he definitely should have been taken at least second, not falling to third behind Jalen Green. But there's some other guys that have probably, when you redraft that draft off the top of my head, I think that's Franz Wagner is also in that class, I want to say. I would obviously take Mobley over Giddey, but Giddey would be somewhere up there. Franz Wagner, that's definitely an argument. Franz versus Mobley. Scotty Barnes, I think he would probably have to take over Evan Mobley at this point with what he showed in the playoffs. But I think I'm getting off topic at this point. I was going to be going into a little bit of the conference finals with the Knicks. I do think the Knicks should be favored with just how insane they've been playing. OG Anunoby stepping up, being like a legit third, even second option, if you want to call him that, but like he's been their de facto third because of obviously Cat and Brunson being the guys that they are. And I've really liked watching this Knicks team, the way that they've kind of changed their play style, being less Brunson centric and playing a lot more through Cat as like a passing hub. It's been interesting to watch, and they are clicking at just a rate that I don't think any other team really has been this playoffs, like consistently. I think that the past like 7 games now, the Knicks have looked like much more of a well-oiled machine than honestly anyone, even including the Thunder. Like the Thunder, obviously the better team on paper and everything, but I think the Knicks just have been hitting a gear together, like optimizing their team chemistry, and playing the best absolute basketball that they are capable of, maxing out their capacity more than everybody else, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I do think that this is going to be a very, very interesting Eastern Conference Finals, but for the fun of it, I went with the Cavs in my prediction. And taking a look at the Pistons side of the fallout, after this playoffs, I mean, there's nothing to be really worried about or disappointed in, I don't think. If you're Detroit, even though you were the 1 seed, obviously, going into this, you're just ahead of schedule. You're a very young team. 2 years ago, you lost 28 games in a row or whatever it was. Like, this is just an entirely different situation that you would never have guessed that you would be in, back then. So it's very, very good, the place that you've reached. And with Cade Cunningham, he's reached a level that a lot of people probably were doubtful that he ever could reach potentially. I mean, he got a couple votes, first place votes in the MVP voting this year, which was announced yesterday. That's just insane. That's insane that we're at that level. And I mean, I don't think that I wouldn't have voted him first, obviously, but I think that he was in the MVP discussion on my personal, fake ballot. I had him 5th, I want to say, right behind Luka at 4th. So, a lot of other people were wanting to put Jaylen Brown in that 5th spot, and I opted for Cade Cunningham for what he was able to do leading this Pistons squad to 60 wins in the regular season. And then also Jalen Duren, being another huge part of that, had an absolutely outstanding season and just really stunk it up. There's no other way to put it. He just really stunk it up in the playoffs this year. So there's 2 kind of views that people have been taking on this. The first one is like the pessimistic, and he's a free agent this summer, so people are wanting to like not extend him or just give him much lower number than what he played up to this season. Or the other thing is, which I'm not even that against this last option, but trade him for Austin Reeves would be, that's a name that I've heard thrown out there quite a bit. It would help both teams quite a bit. And I don't hate that one, especially with the depth that they have there at center in Detroit with Isaiah Stewart and Paul Reed. But at the same time, the other viewpoint, the optimistic view, he's only 22 years old. And, he's like a different type of, there's not really another player like Jalen Duren in the NBA right now. Just the shape, the physical specimen that he is, he's pretty unique. You know what I mean? And he's also, on paper, one of the best types of bigs that you could dream up to pair with your cornerstone of your franchise in Cade Cunningham. So in my opinion, I think the second option is the way to go. Just write it out, probably don't try to give him an absolute max, but I think if you're paying over $30 million a year, I think you just have to do it. Like, it might not feel great with what he just did in the playoffs, but I think you're paying him 30 to 35 million. You just kind of have to do that, and I would bet on him filling that out much more than it looked like he would in these playoffs. Like, Cade and Duren, I think, are just the 2 building blocks that you have to prioritize most on this team, in my opinion. And then Tobias Harris, another guy on the Pistons, he had a great playoffs, like for the first, half of it, maybe even a little bit more than half. But those last few games, he really tailed off and became the Tobias Harris of old that everybody is used to seeing in the playoffs. But, I don't want to downplay the streak that he had, that 8 straight 20-point games. When all season this year, he never had back-to-back 20-point games, but he got 8 in a row in the playoffs this year. And then Duncan Robinson, another guy I wanted to touch on. He's definitely a keeper, I think, for this Detroit team, especially just, being the fan favorite because he's a Michigan alumni. But more than anything, he's just filling the spot that this team desperately needs more of, needs more shooting. I think the main priority that they should be having this offseason in the front office there in Detroit is targeting a like a shooter or another shot creator, probably like both. You want to get a second star essentially for Cade that's a perimeter star. Not necessarily going to be like somebody that's going to be more of a star than Jalen Duren, even just somebody who's more of a creator on offense that can do that as the secondary option, but then can also spot up off the ball and be a knockdown 3-point shooter, can space the floor pretty massively. That would be ideal. And so obviously the guys that are thrown out for that would fit that pretty perfectly would be guys like Lauri Markkanen in Utah, or Trey Murphy down there in New Orleans, or a personal one that I'm familiar with, Michael Porter Jr. in Brooklyn. All those guys, they're different levels of attainable, but I think all of them would do a very, very good job filling in that role for this Detroit squad, and I think would give them really what they need to get over the hump here in the Eastern Conference moving forward. And so to make a trade like that, they would have to be giving up Tobias Harris and some young, pieces maybe with draft capital, obviously, would be the main thing there. They have a lot of draft capital at this point, so they could definitely, cash in those chips to make a move. And the last guy I want to touch on is Danis Jenkins, who definitely played himself into some money this season. He started off as a two-way player and became just an absolutely essential ball handler and guy. He became a starter, by the end of his time here this season. I don't want to act like he's not coming back. He very well could be. But I also feel like there's a lot of teams out there that can use a Danis Jenkins and might pay more for him than the Pistons are able to, given some moves that they might be making, like I just laid out. Instead this season, because right now Danis Jenkins is being that second creator for them, which is obviously not probably his optimal role. He would ideally probably fit better as a backup point guard and spot starter, but those other guys giving you much more of a catch and shoot threat and somebody who can handle the ball as well would be a better option there. And so that was all I had on Game 7 between the Cavs and the Pistons. Like I said, I am going to be taking the Cavs in this next round. Don't feel great about that though. And then you can watch the rest of my bracket video to see what else I do. And I'll probably mention it in the first portion that you've heard before what you're hearing now. So, but similar to that, I'm going to be sending you to another break here, pretty short one. And on the other side, it will be me in the past, last week, discussing some other topics, some news that went on last week, as well as some playoff thoughts from a couple of the series that is a tiny bit dated, but I still think that they're thoughts that I think are interesting to get out there. But the main thing that I wanted to put out there still was my thoughts on the Draymond situation, which is also somewhat dated at this point. But just bear with me. I'm a one-man network here, so but I appreciate you guys listening. I will send you to a quick break here. I'll see you on the other side. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hoop Theory Podcast. Today is Thursday, May 14th as I'm recording this. We've got the playoffs in full swing, obviously. The draft lottery just happened as well, so we've got some other news to go through. But first, the playoffs. 6 teams left. 2 teams have advanced to the third round, the conference finals, and they're waiting for their opponents to finish the second round. And so it's a really weird spread of teams that we have left now. Obviously, there's 6 total, but all of them are actually in the central and the eastern time zones. So there's nobody left out west, which is just kind of interesting. So the scheduling of these games moving forward is going to be something that'll be interesting to see, because I don't know if there's going to be doubled up days. There will be at least one on Friday this week. There's going to be 2 games going on. So it'll be interesting to see, how they schedule those. NBA news to go through. First off, I just wanted to say RIP, rest in peace, to 2 players that lost their lives very recently within this past week. And that was Jason Collins, who is age 47, so he wasn't an active player, but he passed away from brain cancer. And then also Brandon Clark. This was the much more surprising one to me because he's a active player. Or he was an active player, and he passed away on the 11th. He was found dead in his, or I don't know if it was his apartment, or he was in San Fernando Valley, so Los Angeles. He plays for the Grizzlies, and he's from Arizona, and he went to college in Gonzaga, in Washington. So not sure if that's just where he lives in the off season, but He passed away at 29. Cause of death has not been officially reported yet, but it was reported that he was found with drug paraphernalia. And I didn't know about this, but I heard about it after, the news came out that he had passed away. But he was arrested on April 1st this year with kratom or kratom. I heard somebody pronounce it kratom recently. I looked it up because I could have sworn it was kratom. That's how I've always said it. But I looked it up and it says kratom. So that sounds wrong to me, but I'll just go with it. Apparently, so it's a banned substance in Arkansas. And so he was in Arkansas across state lines because obviously Memphis is right on the border of Tennessee and Arkansas. And so he was pulled over going 100 miles an hour, passing people in the no passing zone in a Corvette. And he was found with a blue duffel bag of kratom. And so in the report following his death, they did not say, it was not specified, at least that I saw, what the drug paraphernalia was, but, connecting some dots there potentially just could be that same drug. But yeah, just very unfortunate to see. And for just the outpouring of people, talking about him and everything, I just kind of wanted to give a bit of my thoughts on Brandon Clarke, because he's not your average NBA role player. I really felt like he could have been one of those little thing kings that really, progressed to the level of being a Hall of Fame, not literally Hall of Fame, but you know what I mean? The Hall of Fame of role players that we kind of have in our heads, like the Shane Battiers, who's just the perfect 3-and-D wing. And then Steven Adams right now, is another guy. There's more people, Danny Green, PJ Tucker, just some guys to throw out. But Steven Adams, with the offensive rebounding, just somebody that just has a really insane micro skill that is very high IQ, very unselfish, and is just great in their specific role, even though they're not actual stars on their team in the traditional sense. Draymond Green is a very, very leveled up version of that, because he's a actual Hall of Famer, which is something that I would like to get to later. But yeah, I really felt like he could definitely fit in that category of role player all-stars if he didn't have such a struggle with injuries. The past 3 years now, he had missed basically the whole year. One of them, I think he had an Achilles tear. He definitely had an ACL tear for sure. I believe he had both, though. And then he was out this year for something else. When he got arrested, he was already declared out for the year with some kind of surgery on one of his knees, I think was what it was. So, yeah, it's just very unfortunate when that kind of stuff derails a player's career, and I'm sure that has to do, I would guess, with maybe some mental health, or just, turning to other things, other vices. But, like I said, I've always really liked Brandon Clarke as a role player. He's an undersized big with a rare combo of athleticism and high IQ. And also just one of the best floaters I've ever seen. I've said on the podcast several times that I think Jokic is the GOAT of floaters, and I do still think that. But in terms of a role player, Julian Strawther on the Nuggets has a very, very nice floater that he goes to a lot. But Brandon Clarke, honestly, one of my all-time just rankings of somebody pulling up from 14, 13 feet going into a floater, the rankings of how good I feel about that shot going in, Brandon Clarke is maybe number one on that list. He just had a very weirdly deep range on that shot, and just really had it down pat. Honestly, was a trademark move for him. But yeah, something that I actually didn't know about him was he spent 2 years at San Jose State before he transferred to Gonzaga. I always just knew him as a Gonzaga player. But he only spent 1 year at Gonzaga because he had to sit his junior year for the transfer. And then his fourth year he played at Gonzaga, and then got drafted in the 2019 draft at the 21st pick. And he was a 23-year-old his rookie year. So, I just wanted to say that quick statement about Brandon Clarke there. But moving on to some other NBA news, we've got the draft lottery that took place this weekend. The Wizards got the number one pick, obviously. First time in a while that a team with the worst record actually ended up with the first pick. Jazz at number 2, they jumped up from the 4th pick, or the 4th best odds, you could say. Grizzlies at 3, jumped from 6. Bulls at 4, jumped all the way up from 9. So that was the biggest jump that was seen at the draft lottery. Chicago getting that 4th pick. And then the Pacers, this was the tragedy of the draft lottery. They fell from 2. They had the 2nd best odds. They fell from 2 to 5 and lost their pick because their pick this year was top 4 protected. They actually traded that. They made that trade to make it protected this year with the Clippers to get Ivica Zubac, who's now the starting center for the Indiana Pacers. And so, it was a calculated risk. It was about a 50% chance of it happening, of them falling out of the top 4 because of the way the lottery is set up with the absolute worst teams not having like a guaranteed shot at getting in that very top 4 of the lottery. And Kevin Pritchard, the president of basketball ops for the Indiana Pacers, it was kind of interesting to see him. He reached out or made a statement apologizing to fans after the lottery had finished. And the news had came out that they were not going to have a lottery pick this year when they had the very, very rough, tanking season that they had with their best player, Tyrese Halliburton, being out with his Achilles rehab, and then them also getting rid of Miles Turner in the offseason, their starting center from the finals run last year. And so, they were hoping that this season would grant them, some more luck and get them a good pick in the lottery. But they also needed to fill that center role with Jay Huff being like, an all right backup center, but he was the guy that was starting games for them. They wanted to get somebody for this next season to be back at the top of the East competing for a title. They needed somebody to play that 5 spot. And so Ivica Zubac, I think, was a good guy to go grab. But yeah, that pick did feel a little iffy when they put that in the trade. And obviously, if it would have gone the other way, this would have been a home run. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those deals that just hinges on where that pick lands ultimately, and it vastly swings the value of the deal. And unfortunately, it swung the wrong way for the Indiana Pacers. But even though that all really sucks, I still feel like the Pacers are set up very well for this next season, with obviously Halliburton coming back healthy, hopefully at least, because of, he in his Achilles rehab, he's had some setbacks he had shingles really bad on his face, and he was taking some medication for that caused him to gain a bit of weight. I don't know if that's still going on or not, but last I saw, he was looking pretty different and just struggling with, some of that health stuff. So hopefully, that all goes well and sorts itself out. So, he can return to the fold with Andrew Nembhard there as the starting backcourt, Aaron Nesmith at the 3, and then Pascal Siakam at the 4 with Ivica Zubac, newly acquired, at the 5. And also TJ McConnell, Obi Toppin, Jay Huff, those guys coming off the bench. That might be the top 8 right there. Maybe sprinkle in some Ben Shepherd in there if you want. Or maybe if some of the young guys take a step up, like Jarris Walker or Johnny Furphy, I feel like that's a rotation that could be able to compete. It should be, at least, be able to compete with the top of the East, provided they stay relatively healthy. But yeah, back to the rest of the draft lottery. Nets at 6, they fell from 3. The Kings, unfortunately, fell to 7 from 5 is where their odds were. And then the Hawks, another lucky team here, along with the Clippers being the team that got that 5th pick. The Hawks got 8 with that Pelicans pick that was actually unprotected, so they would have ended up here regardless. But, it was from that very controversial trade last year with the Derek Queen move in the draft last year. And this was probably the least bad outcome for the Pelicans, honestly, all things considered. Like, this pick could have been quite a bit higher. Like, it could have, gone all the way up to 1 with how bad they were this year. But, they had some competition there throughout the year in terms of tanking because, they weren't trying to lose games, the Pelicans, because they didn't have any reason to, because they didn't have their own pick in this draft. But their roster was just that bad that they ended up with pretty bad odds. I think they were 7th because, they fell from 7 to 8. But the Hawks, ended up with their pick. So like I said, this was probably the least bad outcome for the Pelicans. It could have been higher, but still the 8th pick in a very, very deep draft doesn't feel great. When you traded up from like 20th to 13th or whatever that was to grab Queen last year in the lottery, you had the 7th pick and you passed on him there. Like you could have drafted him with that 7th pick instead of making that trade up. It just feels like if you wanted him that bad that you gave up your unprotected first rounder in an even better draft than the one you were currently drafting in, and everybody knew that at the time, then you probably just should have taken him at 7 instead of taking Jeremiah Fears if you really wanted him that badly, So not a great process there, but ended up not as catastrophic as some thought it would. But the Mavericks are the next team at 9. They fell from 8. As opposed to what happened last year with one of the biggest jumps of all time, going from 11th to 1 to get Cooper Flagg, obviously. And then the Bucks at 10, Giannis and company, it didn't pay off all that well sitting Giannis out towards the end of the season trying to tank because they didn't move up at all. They stayed exactly where their odds were. Same with the rest of these teams. The Warriors at 11, Thunder at 12 from that Clippers pick. So the Clippers lost their pick at 12 to the Thunder, but they got the Pacers pick at 5, so it works out for them. But this nightmare scenario was avoided with people not wanting the Thunder to, because this Clippers pick wasn't protected, so the Thunder would have got it regardless. So even if they went all the way up to 1 and won the lottery, the Thunder would have gotten it, which would have been definitely a nightmare scenario for sure. And then the Miami Heat got the 11th pick, or the 13th, excuse me, and then the Charlotte Hornets rounded out at 14. Like I said, this is a deep draft, but I think there's a really tight top 4. I mean, most people would say that. It's not like a hot take for me, obviously, but there's a very clear top 4 going on. I would say 3 of them really are talked about a little bit, at least, with being the number 1 pick, maybe a 4th. I haven't really heard Caleb Wilson's name thrown out there as the number 1 pick, but definitely AJ DeBonsa. He's, the most talked about favorite for going number 1, with Darren Peterson being the second guy there. And then Cam Boozer at 3rd in terms of being talked about for being used with that number 1 pick. DeBonsa, I think, is a pretty heavy favorite, and then Peterson is a pretty big jump over Boozer as well. But to go over each one of these guys, AJ DeBonsa, freshman forward from BYU, 19-year-old, 6'8", 6'9", 215 to 220 pounds range. But overall consensus number 1 pick, like I said, he's a do-it-all, two-way wing, very high floor. I would say out of this top 4, he's probably tied for first in terms of the highest floor here, in my opinion, personally. And then the second highest ceiling is what I would say for him as well. And then Darren Peterson is the next guy, the other number 1 pick, potentially. Freshman guard from Kansas. All 4 of these guys are freshmen. Darren Peterson is 19, 6'4", 6'5", 200 pounds, potential superstar scoring guard. He's also has very good size and athleticism to maybe be a plus defender even, but at the very least, shouldn't be too much of a disaster on that end, just with the physical tool set or the skill set that he has. Highest ceiling out of the top 4 would definitely go to Darren Peterson, but he might have the lowest floor of the top 4. That's the big thing with him. It's just he's a very uncertain prospect with not playing a whole lot in his freshman year, famously, with having apparently full body cramps from doing creatine, which he never said the reason why until very recently, after the season was over. It was just a very, very weird, freshman season. And if he would have played the whole time and looked like he looked in those few games that he actually did play, if you just extrapolated that to a full season, I think he would be going number 1, to be quite honest. I think he would be the favorite here. But it's just with that, the injury question marks combined with the talent and the value in AJ DeBonsa, to his credit, it's kind of hard to choose the guy with that many question marks over a pretty surefire, very, very high-level player in AJ DeBonsa. That's why I think he's ultimately going to go number 1, in my opinion. But yeah, Darren Peterson, like I said, potential superstar scoring guard. For a player comp for him, I didn't give one for DeBonsa, but a rough one I would say for DeBonsa, maybe like Andrew Wiggins. I've seen a lot. Like I think physically and some of the baseline skills, that's a very good comparison. But obviously there's like a negative correlation with Andrew Wiggins. So, some people might have. But like I think that he's a higher floor, higher ceiling Andrew Wiggins. Maybe Andrew Wiggins could be the floor. You could look at it that way because he can do everything that Andrew Wiggins can on the court. And then I think he might be even more like, fiery competitor, higher IQ player, better playmaker. He's also even bigger than Wiggins is. But, he's got the frame and athleticism that Wiggins has. So not a bad one there. But anyways, Darren Peterson, his player comp that I have, which isn't super original to me, but that's the one that I feel like I definitely felt that way before I saw other people, giving comps for him. But the one detail that I added in for what I saw was making him taller. So on the Ringer draft guide, they said that it's Donovan Mitchell with after his leg lengthening surgery, just, saying he's a taller Donovan Mitchell. I think that works really well. Donovan Mitchell is the main guy that I think of when I watch Darren Peterson play. So not a bad one there. And then Cam Boozer, the third guy who I would say is probably going to go to the Grizzlies, but this is the biggest toss-up of the top four, I think, is who's going to go number 3. Again, like I said, I would probably lean Cam Boozer, but Caleb Wilson could definitely go there as well. But Cam Boozer, freshman forward from Duke, 19 years old, 6'8", 250, very high IQ, playmaking big, little thing king, physical post player with touch. He's also a great screener and rebounder and can also shoot a bit as well. In the college level, at least, he shot 39% on almost 4 attempts per game. Shorter line, obviously, but free throw percentage, I think, was pretty solid as well. And I think he has the lowest ceiling of the top 4 probably, but the highest floor, I think, kind of tied with DeBonsa at number 1 for the highest floor. Just there's no way he's not going to be at least like a very good role player. You know what I mean? I think DeBonsa might have an even higher floor than that, potentially. But yeah, it's really a toss-up between those two. I feel like there's less holes in the floor of Cam Boozer, if that makes sense. But the realistic floor of DeBonsa feels a little bit higher than the absolute floor of Cam Boozer, if that makes sense. And then the player comp, another one that I stole from the Ringer draft guide, just because it was so perfect. The Tim Duncan of Antoine Walkers was the player comp that they have for him, or one of them. They have kind of a myriad of them, but that was my favorite one. And then Caleb Wilson, the fourth guy, freshman forward, UNC, 20 years old, so he's a little bit older than the rest of them. 6'9", 6'10", 211 pounds is what he's listed at. Very athletic, big wing, small ball 5. I have him at like second or third highest ceiling, very close with DeBonsa. But I would probably lean DeBonsa. So like of these top 4, I'd say Peterson, DeBonsa, and Caleb Wilson all have the highest ceilings, much higher ceilings than Boozer, if that makes sense. So like Caleb Wilson, even though he's third out of the 4 in terms of ceiling, he still has a very high ceiling. There's a bit of a gap there between 3 and 4 for just the ceiling part of it. And then the lowest floor, I would say, is either Peterson, like I said, or Caleb Wilson. He would be the other contender there. And then player comp that I have for Caleb Wilson, this is actually one that is original to me. I think he's like a younger, bouncier Pascal Siakam is what I see when I watch him play. People are getting really crazy with the comparisons that they've been throwing out to him. Jay Williams famously has been calling him Giannis or KG as his like ceiling, and then his floor is Jermaine O'Neal, which is kind of crazy, I think. But like also even the Ringers comparisons that they have, I didn't love. I kind of understand them. I wasn't feeling them as personally as some of those other ones. Sean Kemp meets Gumby was it was the biggest one on the draft board for the Ringer. And yeah, I don't see that one quite as much, but He's a skinnier Sean Kemp. I guess that kind of makes sense. But I feel like he has more length and like defensive versatility than Sean Kemp did, which I guess, is kind of implied with the Gumby, the skinnier, lankier thing there. So maybe it is a really good comp. I just was hating on it for no reason. But there we go. That is the draft lottery. We've got some more news to go through, a couple more things, and then obviously the two the two playoff series that are going on right now. Did want to talk about those. But first, we're going to be taking a quick break here. I will see you on the other side. All right, welcome back to the Hoop Theory podcast. I'm going to go through some of my notes on the playoffs. I know I kind of said right before the break the steps of what I was going to do. I kind of flipped it around. Instead of doing the news next, I'm going to do the playoffs and then end with some more news topics to go through. So for the Pistons-Cavs series, that's what I'm going to start off with, because now that I'm recording this on Friday, the day has changed in between the breaks. The first game tonight is the Cavs and the Pistons. And for me right now, it feels like the Cavs are really finding their groove, to be honest. They finally won a game on the road, and that it couldn't have come at a better time in Game 5 against the Pistons. So the Cavs have won the past 3 games in a row in this series. Right now, it kind of just feels like whoever doesn't show up between Mitchell and Harden, the other one does, in a given game. So if that pattern keeps continuing, I really feel good about the Cavs' chances coming out of this series at least, and then putting up a fight, a good one. You would think against the Knicks, even though the Knicks right now are really looking like they're rolling. But the Cavs, I feel like things are just starting to coalesce a lot better than, it has been so far in the playoffs. It's looking a lot more like what I had envisioned back when that Harden trade was first made, just giving the Cavs a playmaker to replace Darius Garland, somebody that's more healthy and more available more often. And then also on the defensive end, it gets rid of that disadvantage that they used to have with having 2 small guards on the court with Mitchell and Garland, with Garland being the especially small one there that you have to cover up on defense quite a bit. James Harden, while he's not like a great defensive player, he fills a different spot on the floor defensively. He's a guy who's his strength on the defensive end is guarding posts, using his size and strength to not be moved and, kind of provide some pressure or some opposition to some of the big men in the paint down there, which is the opposite of what Darius Garland's issue is. Darius Garland's issue is when he gets switched on to bigger players, which is almost any other player besides the point guard on the other team, and sometimes even the point guard, then that player is going to punish that mismatch by using their size and posting him up and whatnot. James Harden, you can't do that against, so then you're just left with one smaller guard, and that's Donovan Mitchell, who's not even close to as bad of a defensive liability size-wise as Darius Garland, because he has a lot more length, a lot more strength. He's a little bit taller even, and then also add in the athleticism is at a totally different level. So it's a night and day difference between, the level of defensive liabilities that those two guys are. And so I just felt like schematically, theoretically, like that was a very, very good move to swap out Garland for Harden. It fills a lot of holes there on the Cavs team. And then, if you're worried about the advantages that Garland gives you over Harden being a quick twitch, like fast first step, beat his man off the dribble type of guy, like Harden at his old age especially isn't really doing that anymore, but you still have Donovan Mitchell, to do that. So like, it just works a lot better. It kind of spreads out the different skill sets and the different roles in a much more even and balanced way than they previously had going. But yeah, the offense this past 2 games, like I said, looks more like what I envisioned. Mixing in possessions with Mitchell off the ball, with Harden hitting cutters and laying down passes to bigs underneath the basket when he gets down there on pick and rolls and whatnot. But yeah, it's looking a lot better. A 25-0 run was really the peak of it in Game 4. They opened the second half with that 25-0 run, which I think was the largest run in playoff history for the Cavs, in their franchise, regardless of what point in the game. It just so happened to be what they opened the second half with. But yeah, that was just insane. And I feel like this Pistons team on the other side, Cade is not slowing down at all. He's making this a very, very tough series to win for the Cavs for sure. And, if, on a given night, if they get some contributions offensively from some of their guys, like Duncan Robinson has popped off and had a couple good, especially those first 2 games of the series, was really good. And I think he's had a decent performance, at least in one of the games since then, I want to say, but not to the same level, really. And Karis LeVert, he popped off and had a big game, but that was one of the games they lost in Cleveland. So, that they wasted that one there. But honestly, they're getting a lot from B-ball Paul Reed, even though he's not playing a lot of minutes. There's been a couple games now where late in the game, it seems like they decide, like they figure out, oh, wow, Paul Reed is probably our best big right now, at least. He's performing better than Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart. So let's roll him out there instead. And they literally played, I think it was all of overtime, but at least most of it. Overtime in game 5, they played Paul Reed instead of Jalen Duren. That's who they closed with. So, yeah, and I've heard some people saying that he's the best all-time third-string center, which honestly, I don't have a running list of that, but he would probably be a pretty good choice there, I would think. Just the way that he's been able to perform and the way he shoots, he has the strangest jump shot to me. The way he it's like a grain elevator is what it reminds me of. Some kind of like, just it kind of goes all up a very straight line, the motion, the energy with the ball. And then, yeah, it's just an interesting release. You probably, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you have to see a clip. But if you're watching it while you're hearing me describe it, I think that it will make a lot more sense. But so, it's 3-2 right now for the Cavs. They have a 3-2 lead in the series. And I picked this series to go 6 for the Cavs. And so, they have home court in game 6 back in Cleveland. So I feel pretty good about that prediction. But, obviously if game 6 goes the Pistons away, then yeah, that's much more of a coin flip there. And then over on the other side in the West with that other playoff series that's going on right now, they're both playing tonight, which I don't know why the Spurs-Wolves had an extra day off. They could have just played yesterday. I prefer that, having just one game on per night to pay attention to. And also just like the timing of it. So, they're not overlapping at all and not cutting into each other. But the Spurs-Wolves 3-2 Spurs lead. And honestly, the 2 games that the Wolves won have been very, very close. And one of them, was Wemby getting ejected in the first half from that nasty elbow that he gave Naz Reid. So, that's, I think the Wolves are they're sitting in a pretty good spot right now, all things considered. And Wemby just came out with a vengeance in game 5, after being not suspended, but ejected in the prior game. He came out with a vengeance and scored 16 of the first 24 points for the Spurs. He had, at one point towards the end of that run, he had this move that people were calling it a finger roll. I think Reggie Miller on the broadcast, I want to say, called it a finger roll. And I heard some other people use some different terminology. To me, that was like a hook shot dunk. It was like he drove and did this post spin into what almost any big man ever after that spin would go into a hook shot, and he did that full motion as if like he was going in for this little hook shot pretty close to the basket, or somewhat close, not close enough to dunk, but apparently for Victor Wembanyama with his 8-foot wingspan, it was close enough to dunk, where he swung it in this like hook shot motion, but just kept the ball in his hands and kept going, and just kind of like threw it in. Like I don't think he touched the rim with his hand, but he like threw the ball down into the rim, into the basket. It was, and he did that over, 7'2" Rudy Gobert, 4-time Defensive Player of the Year. Just an unworldly specimen it's just scary that we're at this point already, at only 22 years old. And other than injuries, I don't see what's going to be stopping him later in his career. Just nobody, even to be able to do that, like have the size and moves and like dribbling ability to like get to that move and then execute it with his size. Just doing that alone is like a cheat code. But then you add in the fact that he can pass, he can shoot, he is very, very smart. Like he has good character outside of obviously getting a little fired up on the court every once in a while and administering that elbow to Naz Reid, which I will say, they're kind of deploying, the Wolves they're deploying the Jokic rules onto Wemby this series for sure. It's interesting to watch somebody else, another star who, is getting that same kind of treatment from this team and seeing how he boils over as well. When everybody was making big deals about what Jokic did, which wasn't even all that much when you really think about it. There's just a couple examples of him getting a little frustrated for sure. But he never committed a violent act on anybody. He ran up to one person, and got in his face, but he didn't hit him with an elbow directly to his chin or neck or whatever, like Wemby did, obviously. But, there's just a lot of little things, or you could call them big also, like just lots of physical play, lots of physical moments between the Wolves players with Wemby, and that continued in Game 5. They're just like trying to get under his skin. But I don't know. To me, it's just I don't understand why it just goes so uncalled. Just because they're big, I guess. Wemby and Jokic both they don't get the whistle that they should. It's kind of like the Shaq complex that people have talked about with him in the past that he had. So when you think about it that way, I guess it makes sense. But still, it's just a little bit frustrating to watch sometimes as a watcher of basketball. It feels like they should even that out a little bit more. But a big key to this series is the Gortat screens on Wemby. I'm sure you've heard that term being thrown around now in these playoffs, especially from this series. But, it's essentially Marcin Gortat, who played back in the day with the Wizards and Magic, the Clippers, maybe a couple other spots. But, he was a big man from Poland that when he would roll on the pick and roll, he would seal his man. So it's called a screen because, like, schematically, what it does for your offense, it is a screen essentially. But the way that you execute it is not a screen, because if it were a screen, it would be illegal. That's why people always comment and say, like, the Gortat screen isn't even legal. You're not allowed to do it. You are allowed to do it because what you're doing is not screening the guy. You go down into the lane toward where the rim protector is, and you put your back to him. You seal him like you're posting up. You're trying to get post position, but instead of like trying to get legit post position, you're actually just backing him under the basket, to the other side of the basket as much as you can to open up that driving lane, open up the basket for your teammate, the ball handler. So yeah, if you were, that would definitely be a moving screen if you were facing the player. But since there's a different rule that you can fight for position like that, backing down, you get away with it. And so Randall and Gobert have both been doing that to Wemby a lot this series, which I've thought in the past, I've always wondered why people don't do that more, because that's how the Nuggets have always, for the longest time now, like several years. It hasn't just been this year, but the way the Nuggets have kind of figured out how to play the Spurs team built around Wemby, one of the best rim protectors of all time, Jokic and Gordon, two bigger guys. It's kind of similar to Gobert and Randall, a big 5 and a really strong 4. Both those guys, all 4 of those guys have lower centers of gravity from Wemby and are also just built, more strong and compact. And Wemby, with his very, very high center of gravity, he's not all that hard to really move out of the way given his size. Like, for how big of a guy he is, he's a lot easier to move than you would think because of how high that center of gravity is. So I've always wondered why teams don't do that more against him when, a lot of they have good perimeter defensive players on the Spurs, don't get me wrong. But in that pick and roll, especially, one of the biggest keys to the Spurs' success on the defensive end is having Wemby in the paint. And so if you're neutralizing that or obstructing that in any way, that should be a pretty big advantage. And that's shown to be a pretty massive one in this series. It's how the Wolves have survived and done as much as they've done in this series. And they've also used it a little bit against Luke Kornet when he's in there, although you don't even really need to do it against Luke Kornet because there's other ways to make him bleed defensive value already on top of that, before you get to that point. With Wemby, you can't really attack him in mismatches all that easily because of how athletic he is and long he is, how much he can recover. With Kornet, he's just much, much slower with his feet, and he's not even near as long or athletic in jumping and trying to get a contest when recovering as Wemby is. So he's a guy that you can make him switch in the pick and roll and switch onto a guard, and he's pretty much toast. You can create an easy shot that's pretty open from the mid-range or three-point, or take him to the basket, all those kinds of things. Or, you're drawing the help and you find the open man. So, he's a lot easier to exploit in that way. So when he's been on the floor, that's what they've been doing. But even if he isn't switching and he's dropping in the pick and roll, they've been using that Gortat screen, whipping it out on him as well. So yeah, I've just always found little actions or little plays that are named after pretty obscure players, or not. He's not obscure. He was a very, very good starting center for quite a long time in the NBA. But still, like having an entire screen named after you that's being used now today, it's just kind of interesting to think about. There's another screen, like the Varejao screen, is also one that I think about, like in that similar type of way. Anderson Varejao it's basically just flipping the screen. So you're coming up, looking like that you're going to set the screen one direction, but right at the last second, you rotate your feet, pivot, and go to the other side. To confuse the defenders. And that's a Varejao screen, The matchups is another thing about the series that I have found interesting. The matchups seem to be Wemby and Gobert, and then anything else is fine, which might be an indictment on Julius Randle in this series so far. Stephon Castle and Keldon Johnson, I believe, are guarding him the most in this series. When Castle's not on the floor, I'm pretty sure it's Keldon Johnson, or that's what I've noticed in spots before. And then they start with Devin Vassell on Ant instead of Stephon Castle for that reason, which is interesting because, in a vacuum, you think of, who's the best guy that you're going against? Ant. Obviously, that's the guy you want to stop the most. And your best defender to guard Ant is Stephon Castle for sure. Devin Vassell isn't like a, lockdown, primary. That's not like his strength necessarily, but he can do it. He can do it at a passable clip. And so you're starting with Vassell on Ant because Castle is just a little bit bigger than Vassell and a little bit more athletic as well. And so he also just plays a lot more physically. He's been playing Julius Randle pretty tough. And, their Spurs lineup is interesting. It's a one giant guy, obviously, in like a 7'5" body in Victor Wembanyama. And then they've got one smaller guard in De'Aaron Fox, who stands at about 6'3", 6'4", maybe at the most. But then the other three guys, all the wings, are pretty much the same size. Vassell's a little bit smaller. He's 6'5", 200 pounds or so. And then Stephon Castle and Julian Champagnie are both 6'6", 215. And so, they've been putting Castle on Randle because of his physicality and his ability to... And he's also, I think, a little bit longer than Champagnie, I would say. Then Keldon Johnson coming off the bench, who's 6'5", but 220. He's built more like a bowling ball. But all of these sizes, obviously Julius Randle at 6'9", 250, and being the physical guy that he is, he should be bullying these matchups. He should be doing a lot more of the Aaron Gordon type stuff, where whenever there's a cross match or somebody that's being assigned to Gordon, who's not big enough to hang, Aaron Gordon will be very aggressive about getting position and going to that, making them pay, as often as possible. And Julius Randle has not really done that in this series, which I think is a big mistake, to be honest. And if he were to do that, who knows what kind of series this would be? If the Wolves would be up 3-2 instead of the other way around. I doubt that though, because the 2 games that they've lost, or the 3 games that they've lost, have all been pretty big blowouts for the most part. So, but the guys guarding Ant, like I said, Vassell is the guy who's starting on him. And then I saw a lot where there was Keldon Johnson in the game instead of Vassell. Castle, they would switch Castle onto Ant, who's, in a vacuum, their best guy to guard Ant. But you got Keldon Johnson out there on the floor, who's better for guarding Julius Randle than Ant for sure. So then that's when they switch that up. It's just kind of dependent on which guys fit the best and what that means for where the other guys have to go. And then Dylan Harper also got some time on Ant in, I think it was in Game 5 or Game 4, one of those two. It was Game 5 for sure. And he looked pretty good on Ant as well. He held his own. And then in the second half, there was a little stint with Carter Bryant guarding him. And look, that popped off the screen a decent amount with him forcing that 8-second violation on Ant in the backcourt, just not letting him bring the ball up the court, really. He was putting way too much pressure on him. And yeah, that was impressive to watch too. It's just, this Spurs team is just so deep. Them and the Thunder. It's just crazy thinking about the future of the NBA, how much these two teams are going to be dominating. Like, it doesn't seem like there's an end in sight for that, because all the guys that they bring off the bench are just, they're all so young and they've all hit. Like, it's just crazy the hit rate that they've had. A lot of picks, but it's also the rate that they've hit those picks is just unfair. I heard somebody, it was on Nerd Sesh actually, Carson from Nerd Sesh, he made one of the best comparisons that I've heard in a while. He said that the Spurs and the Thunder are to basketball as Yannick Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz are to tennis. Two young guys that are just like at the very pinnacle, like hovering above everybody else in that sport. And every single tournament, one of those guys is winning it or they're facing each other. Because, at the rare chance, but still capable chance of somebody, an underdog, overthrowing one of them, it's very unlikely that they both get overthrown in the same tournament because of how good those guys are. So it's just like they're taking turns. One of them is going to win no matter what. And it kind of feels like that might be what's going to be happening over these next few years. And even further than that, with these two teams in San Antonio and Oklahoma City. But yeah, my pick in this series was the Spurs in 6, and feeling pretty good about that, honestly, as Game 6 is going to be in Minnesota, but still, these, like, the two games that the Wolves have won, like I've said, have not been super convincing because of, circumstances. So I feel pretty good about the Spurs closing it out in 6, to be quite honest. And now I will let you guys go to another quick break here before I finish off the rest of this episode with some more news, things that have happened, GMs getting fired and GMs getting hired, as well as, a certain player who's still active having some things going on in the media. So I will let you guys get to that after this short break. I will see you on the other side. All right, welcome back to the Hoop Theory podcast. I've got a couple news items I'd like to go through, starting off with Daryl Morey, the GM of the 76ers, as well as, for a long time, the GM of the Houston Rockets back in the Harden days. He was let go by the 76ers, which I don't really totally understand, to be quite honest. Like, I get the contracts that he gave Embiid and Paul George turned out to not be good at all, and the Embiid one didn't feel good, especially even when they made it. That's the more indefensible one, is the Embiid one, but I still kind of get the inverse or the flip side of, like, what else are you going to do? Just let his deal expire, and then you're kind of, at that point, it feels like you might need to rebuild, hit the rebuild button, which nobody wants to do, especially when you have a roster that's so, like, full of talent in theory. Like, that would hurt to try to hit that button, especially with the Sixers, with their recent history of tanking so much, that, like, you don't want to just go right back to that. There's the thought of maybe you can rebuild on the fly without really having to tank, just building around Tyrese Maxey and the young guys that they have there. But, VJ Edgecombe, as well as Tyrese Maxey, you weren't sure that he was going to reach even the level that he's at right now, back when they first made that extension with Embiid. At least that wasn't a given. And then also VJ Edgecombe was not in the fold yet, and that changes a lot as well. It makes it seem like a lot more doable to actually do that, to rebuild on the fly. So I do understand that to a certain extent, but I also don't know how much, like, ownership was even involved. It seemed like a lot of the decisions that Daryl Morey made that you can kind of use as flaws, on his resume for what he did in Philadelphia, it feels like some of those have been more influenced by ownership anyways, like the ducking the tax thing with Jared McCain. People freaking out about how he made that Jared McCain trade and didn't help himself out with those quotes afterwards saying that he was selling high. But, they had a lot of depth at the point guard position. Not saying that they couldn't have found a use for him at all, obviously, but it was just a pretty loaded spot on the roster. And, trading him to get some draft capital to get below the luxury tax, like, obviously it doesn't seem like that was just him wanting to do that. Just, it's not helping him in that way to get under the luxury tax. It's more about the ownership and the team. I'm sure that was probably what was going on there. So it's hard to hold moves like that against GMs, but at the same time, maybe you could have found an alternate way to get below the tax. Maybe for Grimes, I guess, being a guy that you ship out instead. But Grimes has been more important to the rotation, than McCain has been. So I don't really feel like that one is that major. It's definitely not a fireable offense, even though it doesn't feel good to, from the Sixers' point of view, to see how well Jared McCain has adapted and fit in Oklahoma City. Obviously doesn't feel great. But again, it's just sometimes things work out the worst way. And when you're making those moves, it's not necessarily like that wasn't bad process there, I don't think. When given the circumstances of your boss is requiring you to shed salary, and so you've got to dump some salary somewhere. That wasn't a bad use or a bad method of doing so when you are so stacked at that position. And then the Paul George contract didn't feel nearly as bad at the time. It obviously didn't, in my opinion, it didn't feel great because, he's an older guy. You don't want to give that length of a deal to a guy like that. But that's just kind of how a lot of teams handle those stars recently. At that point, it did not feel like the end or that wall that he hit immediately in Philadelphia was coming, because he just had an All-NBA level season his last year in Los Angeles. And so it didn't feel like the end was in sight, really. In terms of the very near future, but it was very, very quick. And I shouldn't say end, but end to him being an all-NBA talent. He's no longer that. He's no longer really an all-star talent, although in these playoffs, he performed somewhat close to that, honestly. He at least was a very high-level role player in these playoffs, but obviously not worth the $50+ million annually that he's been given. So while I feel like there's some things there that you can critique, it's just, hindsight is 20/20 on those things. I'm just more surprised by this being the year they decide to do it, because last year was the absolute bottom, the pits of the 76ers experience, them having a very, very disappointing season. This year, the way that they went out, obviously didn't feel great in the second round against the Knicks, the way it happened, being swept, and then your arena being filled by Knicks fans in the last two games, sending you home. That obviously didn't feel awesome. But for the season overall, they outperformed expectations. They went over on their regular season wins line. And then once they got to the playoffs, obviously the Celtics were the favorite in the East to go all the way to the finals, and therefore were pretty heavy favorites to win the series against Philadelphia. And Philadelphia was able to flip the script on that and pull it out. And so overall, I feel like you should feel pretty positive if you're in the Sixers camp about how this season turned out. So it just kind of surprised me the timing of how they're deciding to let go of Morey at this time, because I don't know who's out there that they're really feeling better about, but we'll have to see on that. Another guy who's made a move is Masai Ujiri, and he got hired for the Mavericks in Dallas as the replacement to Nico Harrison. Masai Ujiri, obviously former Toronto Raptors GM. He's the one who made the trade for Kawhi in 2019, or the summer of 2018 rather, to win that 2019 title with Kawhi on that one rental year in Toronto. And then he was also the GM of the Nuggets before Tim Connelly. So he was the GM who made the Melo trade in Denver to get all of that draft capital and good players back. One of the best star player returns in a trade that's ever happened, honestly, was that one. They got the pick that ended up being Jamal Murray from that trade. So, I'm excited to see what he can do with the new squad here in Dallas, for sure. And then the other thing that I did want to touch on is the Draymond Green situation. I do think Draymond gets a little bit of a disrespect in these things. That's kind of why I want to share my thoughts on it. Obviously, there was the Draymond Green versus Austin Rivers back and forth, that beef that's been going on. They've both been continuously clapping back at one another. And while I do think overall I agree with a lot of the points that Austin Rivers is making, and even Austin Rivers said, obviously you have a Hall of Fame career, you had a better career than mine and everything, but he was calling him out on like talking trash as if he would be able to outperform somebody like Austin Rivers in a one-on-one, or also making the comments, which I thought was very dumb, the comment of that Draymond made about Steve Kerr, because he was anticipating, I guess, Steve Kerr not re-signing with Golden State, so he thought this was the end. I guess I don't know why he said this, but he said, when I look back on it, I can't help but feel like Steve Kerr, in a way, hindered my career or hindered my development or something like that. But at the same time, I wouldn't become who I am today, without him. But I do get what he's saying, but the hindered my career part is just a little interesting to me. Like, obviously, I get when you're a NBA athlete, you have like just that much belief in your own abilities that you feel like you could have excelled at a certain play style that you envisioned at a certain point. That, like, coming out of college, he thought he was a scorer, somebody who could do more offensively than he does in terms of scoring the ball. I don't want to downplay Draymond's role on offense at all as the playmaker and handoff hub and screener. Like, all that stuff is very, very important and is a big key to how Golden State has succeeded so greatly. Like, Draymond is a massive part of that identity. I would put him over Klay Thompson. A lot of people rank those guys, say that it's Steph, Klay, and then Draymond. I think Draymond is the second most important piece to that core Golden State identity in terms of the players, in that original group. I think Draymond, he's the heart and soul of the team, obviously, emotional leader and whatnot. Obviously, I get all the complaints about him as well, all the critiques that he is a little bit over the top with, his reactions and how he handles himself, his behavior on the court and off the court, honestly, at times. Understand all that, don't disagree with it. But on the court, he's one of the greatest, defensive basketball minds that has ever played the game. That's just a fact. And he might be the best help defender that has ever lived. Just his ability to he's like a free safety, like an Ed Reed. Just like, he has the quarterback's brain as a defensive player, that type of thing. As well as his just very deceiving length and size and energy and motor to defend bigger players. He can switch all over the court, especially in his prime. Like, he could do all these things, and then on the offensive end had very, very good feel and similar IQ to where he could see plays before they would happen, pass people open and use his screening to get the best shooters in the world open. Obviously, people always dog on him saying that he's so lucky where he ended up, which he is. He is lucky that he ended up where he is. He would not be elevated or used in the optimal way possible if he did not end up in Golden State. There are very few other places he could have ended up where he would have found the role that he's become like one of the best ever at. Even in the places like Portland, some other places where I feel like he could have played that same role, it's very hard to think or guarantee that whoever was the coach at that point, Terry Stotts, I think, probably in Portland at that point, it's hard to imagine that person would have, or whatever system he would have ended up in, would have made that same decision, to form the offense that way and to put him in the position that he was put into by Steve Kerr. So, there's no guarantee it happens in another place, even where the pieces align to where he could excel in that role, if that makes sense. So, it's a perfect storm and everything for his career personally, but also I hate the people who say that the Golden State Warriors would have every single ring that they have without Draymond. If Draymond wasn't there, they would have won all 4 of those rings. I disagree. I don't know if they would win any, honestly, if they did not have Draymond Green. That's how important he is to that squad. And off the court stuff, he apparently was the reason, this has been documented, that he was the driving force in recruiting KD to the Warriors. So, if you want to make the argument that because you probably would be right, if you would argue that the Warriors with KD and without Draymond would have won a ring, you're probably right there. But there's the factor of the only reason KD is there is because of Draymond that you have to take into account as well. But, before KD was there, the Golden State Warriors that won a title in 2015 and had 73-9 record in 2016, that team is not even close to that degree or that level of a team without Draymond Green. That's just a fact. What he was able to do in terms of how allowing them to play with the lineups that they would play on defense because of how he filled those gaps and offset what you would think is a massive disadvantage, not having a big out there. He was able to play the role of a big while also giving you the advantage of having a small team, playing fast and playing in transition and handling the ball, like having guard skills at that size. He just can do like so many things on the court outside of scoring the ball. He's like, Ricky Rubio, one of my favorite players ever, could do everything other than score the basketball. That is Draymond, but Draymond is also, much bigger with much longer wingspan and was more athletic at his peak for sure. So he was a defensive demon on top of his ability to read the floor and do a lot of things on offense without scoring. That's why I just feel like Draymond gets the short end of the stick so often in player breakdowns, like how people evaluate talent. Like Draymond is a very, very talented player, just in a very different way, in a very specific, type of way in comparison to how we traditionally view talent in sports and in basketball specifically. So, yeah, that's my main thoughts there on Draymond Green and that debate. But I guess the other part of this debate was the Charles Barkley piece when he went on. Draymond went on the TNT. I did call it TNT. I shouldn't though. Inside the NBA. There we go. Because it's on ESPN now, obviously, with TNT not having any broadcasting rights for the NBA anymore. But Draymond went on Inside the NBA, took the place of Shaq for a night, and he had this comment about Charles Barkley. He's like, the main goal for all of us is to not end up like you did in Houston, looking like Charles Barkley in a Rockets uniform, when he was talking about like the twilight stages of his career type of thing, which, yeah, like I get the people all complaining about Draymond needs to be able to take things without, he dishes stuff out, but he seems like he can't laugh at himself at all. He takes things too personal. I thought that comment was not all that bad. Like, I felt like people acting like he was taking it too personally or whatever. I feel like there's other examples where he has done that in the past, but this one I didn't really feel that way about it. Like, I felt like him making that comment, Charles Barkley could have just taken that on the chin and ran with it pretty easily. But at the same time, like I get Austin Rivers' point and Draymond talking crap about somebody who is much more talented in terms of scoring the basketball and like, doing the traditional type of things where it creates this interesting dynamic where Draymond, if he talks trash to people, that other people can be like, you can't hang with me in, scoring the ball or, doing these types of things. But at the same time, I just feel like Draymond is somewhat justified in feeling like I've had a better career than you. You can't do what I do, Like it never really gets flipped around back that way. I feel like it should more often where, yeah, players are like, oh, Draymond, you can't do this. And he's like, well, you can't do what I do. That's how he should respond rather than trying. He goes more on the offense. He goes more on the trying to dig in and tear down other guys. And that's where I think that it just all cascades and becomes this lose-lose for Draymond every time. He just takes the wrong approach to it. He should just keep it as simple as you can't do what I do. And don't go into the areas of feeling like you could have been an offensive player, been a scorer, if Steve Kerr let you do that or used you in a different way. I don't know if you would have made it in the NBA if you would have kept playing the way that you were at Michigan State, to be quite honest. Like, at least you're way less likely to succeed in the NBA doing that than what you do now, than how you turned out. Because that's one of the most unique, versatile, very, very useful players that you can put on a team to raise the floor of the players around you, there's tons of value in that. It's just not the traditional type of value that we usually think of when we're talking about good players in the NBA. I feel like I'm kind of going in circles at this point. So I think that's a pretty good place to stop for today. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it. Stay happy, stay healthy. I'll talk to you guys next episode.